Once upon a time, in the land of Canaan, there was a man named Jacob who had 12 sons. The first was named Reuben. Then came Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, and Zebulun. Then came Jacob's favorites, Joseph and his little brother, Benjamin. To show his love for his son Joseph, Jacob gave him a coat of many colors. When his brothers saw this, they became very jealous of their little brother Joseph. One night, Joseph had a dream that 11 sheaves of wheat surrounded him and bowed down to him. Then he had a second dream that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. The next morning at the breakfast table, Joseph told his family about his dreams, the wheat, the sun, the moon, and the stars all bowing down to him. His father rebuked him, and the rest were enraged. They said they would never bow down to him. The brothers decided to eventually get rid of Joseph. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to go and check on his brothers who were working in the fields. The brothers saw him coming from afar and plotted to kill Joseph. But Reuben said not to kill him because he was their brother. So instead, they stripped him of his coat and threw him in a pit. Then they saw a band of Ishmaelites and decided to sell Joseph to them. So they hauled him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Then they decided to kill a baby goat and dip the coat in its blood. Then they told Reuben what they had done when he came back looking for Joseph. Then they all took the bloody coat to their father, who was devastated by the loss of his favorite son and could not be comforted. Meanwhile, Joseph and the Ishmaelites had arrived in Egypt. The Ishmaelites sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. And Joseph prospered in Potiphar's house. Potiphar saw that God was with Joseph and put him in charge of his house and overseer of all he had. But little did Joseph know, Potiphar's wife was watching him very closely. Then, one day, when everyone in the house was gone and Potiphar's wife had dismissed her maids, she went to talk to him. But as she came closer, he ran away just as she grabbed his coat. Potiphar's wife was furious that her plan had failed, and she screamed. When Potiphar got home, she told him that Joseph had tried to harass her. Potiphar was infuriated that someone would dare harass his wife, so he sent his guards to grab Joseph and throw him in the dungeon. But, nevertheless, Joseph found favor in the eyes of the jailkeeper. The jailkeeper also saw that God was with Joseph and put him in charge of all of the prisoners. Then, one night, the chief baker and the chief butler, who had been accused of stealing, both had dreams. The butler dreamt that there was a vine with 3 branches, and on the branches were blossoms that turned to grapes. and that he pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup, which he held in his hand, and gave it to Pharaoh. Then the baker dreamt that he had 3 baskets on his head, and they were filled with baked goods, but that the birds came and ate them. Then they both woke, troubled. And so Joseph came and asked them what was wrong. So they told him their dreams. To Joseph, he said that God could interpret dreams. So he told them the interpretations. To the butler, he said, "The 3 branches are 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place." But to the baker, he said, "The 3 baskets also mean 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from off you and will hang you in a tree where the birds can eat your flesh." And in 3 days the guards of Pharaoh came for the baker and told him that he had been proven guilty of theft, and that day was hung in a tree where the birds could pluck his flesh. Then they also told the butler that he was free to return to his duty of chief butler. Joseph asked him if he would remember him when he came before Pharaoh. But when he did, he forgot all about Joseph. Then, 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream that 7 fat, healthy cows came out of a river and fed in a meadow. Then, after them, came 7 scrawny, sickly cows who ate the fat cows, but were still just as scrawny and sickly as before. Then he had a second dream, that the 7 good, full ears of corn grew on a stalk. Then 7 scrawny and sickly ears came up after them and devoured them, but were still just as scrawny and sickly as before. Then he woke up, troubled by his dreams. So he called for the chief magicians and wise men of Egypt. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh asked if there was anyone in the land that could interpret dreams. Then the butler remembered Joseph. And the butler told Pharaoh that a Hebrew prisoner had interpreted his and the baker's dreams. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. When Joseph came to him, he told Joseph his dreams, and Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. Joseph told him that both dreams had the same meaning. The 7 fat cows and the 7 good ears of corn were 7 years of plenty. But the 7 skinny cows and the 7 bad ears of corn were 7 years of famine in the land. Pharaoh was pleased and made Joseph second in command over all of Egypt and overseer of the grain storing plan for the famine, and gave him a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah. Then Joseph married Asenath and had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. During the years of plenty, Joseph stored all the grain he could in the 7 years of plenty. But then the famine began, and people from all over the earth came to buy grain from Joseph. His brothers also came to buy grain from him, but they did not recognize him. Joseph accused them of being spies against Egypt and threw Simeon in jail, and would only release him if they came back with Benjamin. When they did come back with Benjamin, Joseph secretly wept. Then he had a feast for his brothers. But at the feast, the brothers were completely perplexed when Joseph and Benjamin received 5 times as much food as the rest of them. Then Joseph commanded his servants to fill their sacks to the brim with grain, and told his servants to put his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. When they had been gone a while, Joseph set out after them. Then he stopped the brothers, and one by one, the servants opened the sacks to look for the cup. And when he came to Benjamin, he found the silver cup in his sack, and he was accused of stealing it. Joseph said that they could all go free, but he would keep Benjamin for a slave. Each one offered himself as a slave instead, begging for him to just let Benjamin go. Joseph was touched that his brothers would lay themselves down for Benjamin. Then he told his servants to leave. When they were gone, Joseph started crying and told them that he was their brother, Joseph. They all rejoiced, and Joseph hugged Benjamin tightly, and his other brothers were very happy too. Then Pharaoh summoned Joseph and told him that all of his family could live in Goshen. So the brothers left Egypt. And traveled to Canaan to get their father and their families. When they arrived back in Egypt, Joseph ran to his father and cried for a while, clinging to him. And after years of torment, Jacob was finally happy, knowing that Joseph was alive and knew that he could die in peace. And they all lived happily ever after for 1 generation. Then came another Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. But that is another story for another time.